All right, everyone, we got all sorts of funny news coming out of the UK. I guess Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister there, he's a conservative. He's telling the EU people that he wants to continue renegotiating. Now, the date for hard Brexit, that is, if no deal is achieved before then, is October 31st. It's Halloween. That is going to be one hell of a week, trust me, especially, it's going to be great. But here's the thing. There's a separate report that I guess is widely circulated. It was leaked, which means it's opportunism. This is Project Fear sort of bullshit, saying, well, if there's a hard Brexit, a no-deal Brexit, we will have shortages of food and medicine and stuff. Basically, Armageddon. I'm thinking to myself, no, not necessarily. You could strike a trade deal with anywhere else in the world, but the UK is being cast by the anti-Brexit sort of folks, by the European Union's tyranny-loving multinationalists, basically as being the only nation in the history of the world incapable of trading outside of its own region while being a large economy. Like, is the UK like Laos? Is the UK Rwanda or something? That it's incapable of striking a trade deal with any other region of the world other than the European mainland? Like, outside of Europe, nothing exists. Essentially what it is this. The EU and its backers want to cast the UK off as weak in hopes that people won't want sovereignty, so that when there are inevitable problems in the shake-up after Brexit, they can blame it on Brexit rather than the real problem, which is that the UK's economy needs to be restructured in the wake of having been held back for decades by the EU, fiscally. That's what it boils down to. The UK can trade with the EU. It would be fairly local, nice and efficient. That's wonderful. Having been in an EU country there briefly, the Netherlands namely, there's some cool shit there, but I mean, the UK is also capable of trading elsewhere. It's not like the UK isn't an island with a lot of ships, now is it? With a lot of shore frontage. Oh, I thought they were landlocked and shit in the UK. I mean, what are you talking about, dude? Despite the fact that it's a declining power on the world stage, the UK still has a top 5 economy. I think it's in the top 5. I think it goes the US, China, who's number 3 now? I can't remember exactly who's number 3. Russia rounds out the top 10. Is it Germany is number 3 now? And then India, I think, is up there. I think India just took over number 4 for the UK. And then I think France, if I remember correctly. I don't know. I'm probably getting them out of order. I know the US and China are number 1 and 2. And that's what matters in a bipolar world, damn it. You've got NATO and then you've got the Eastern Bloc. It's the same old Cold War bullshit we've been suffering under for half a century. Anyway, you've got a strange situation where the UK, any other country, not as part of the EU, is capable of trading, is capable of negotiating travel between itself and other nations, is capable of doing all the things a normal nation does. Canada does this, Brazil does this, South Africa does this, India does this, every other nation does this, except for EU states. European states, for some inexplicable reason, are under the delusional belief that without the EU, 2 things happen. You stop being able to trade with other European states that are still part of that union, and war breaks out. I have had people in Europe literally declare to me that their worry is World War III if the EU were to dissolve. They believe that countries in Europe would immediately begin attacking one another for land and resources. They actually believe this. Despite the fact that there was no EU, for several decades after the Second World War, there was relative peace and prosperity in the process of rebuilding Europe before the European Union ever was a thing. Somehow there weren't huge problems other than, the whole Iron Curtain thing going on at the time, I suppose. Having a foreign threat amalgamated them together, which is partially why the EU, I guess, forms. But it's problematic. It doesn't make sense to have a currency union. That's one thing. Even people that don't believe in sovereignty, that are pro-EU, are starting to ramble about that and say, well, at least on the economic end, we need to ease up. Merkel's policy, Merkel, who's probably got Parkinson's or DTs or some shit, the woman that jiggles around every time she tries to stand for more than 5 minutes, and I guess isn't long for the world probably at this point. Like, hopefully she drops out before her term's even up. The Merkelites believe in basically abusing anyone that steps out of line. Then you have the East European mentality, which is, no, incentivize things, throw money at the problem. Basically throw money at us. It's interesting sovereignty, but you look at some of these populistic movements in Eastern Europe, it's not so much that they're anti-EU, that it's the migration problem that pisses them off. By the way, you haven't heard as much about that. The Merkelites backed off a little bit. I wonder why. Could it be because demographic studies were getting too damning and they had no choice? Maybe so. But anyway, the idea that the UK is incapable of getting its medical shortage addressed from anywhere else in the world is ludicrous. The idea that the UK is going to begin to starve because they can't trade with the French to get their wine. What are you talking about? You've got arable land of your own, number one. Hey, we grow food over here. We are capable of selling to you, right? It's probably cheaper than buying in the EU. In fact, when the EU's regulations are no longer lording over you, you can get food from the US. Right now, you probably half the time can't. At the very least, tariffs probably make it too expensive to do that. You got Stockholm syndrome a bit. That's the whole fucking problem. Call it London syndrome at this point. Basically the same thing, but demographically. Come on. The UK is a big country. You're big boys. You're capable of taking your toys and leaving the EU table, the special table, and going to the rest of the world and striking trade deals with them. The other possibility is, let's say there's a no-deal Brexit, and you find yourself, for some reason, your leadership is too incompetent to make a negotiation with the US or Canada or anywhere else that can supply you with food. Why don't you continue negotiating with the EU states? You've put Brexit's off the table at that point. You've already had it. So why don't you do separate negotiations on trade? Oh, you end up paying a little bit more. It's a small price to pay for sovereignty. Act like a normal nation. The thing is, the UK should have thrown its weight around and said, look, we voted for sovereignty. We're leaving. Fuck off. We're going to have trade deals maybe separate from every other negotiation. Buy. Should have done that. Instead, you looked weak because, Theresa May was never a Brexiteer, and now things have been crippled. It's going to take you a long time to pick up the pieces. It's a real big problem. That's about all. Peace out.